There are prisons built to contain criminals, and there are prisons that seem to have been built to break the very idea of humanity. For more than a century, one specific name caused immediate silence among police officers, judges, and prisoners in the United States. A name that required no explanation. A name that carried an invisible sentence even before the verdict was delivered. Sing Sing Prison. Located along the Hudson River just 50 kilometers from New York City, Sing Sing appeared at first glance to be just another gray stone structure. But for those who knew it from the inside, it was nothing ordinary. It was a psychological point of no return. Since the 19th century, hardened criminals, murderers, mobsters, professional thieves, and men accused of unspeakable crimes heard the same phrase echo through courtrooms. "You're going to Sing Sing." There was no need to raise one's voice, no need for further threats. The sentence was complete, because Sing Sing was not known merely for its walls. It was known for what happened when the gates closed. A place designed to intimidate, even before it existed. The story of Sing Sing begins in the early 19th century, when the state of New York faced a growing problem: overcrowded prisons, internal violence, and repeat offenders. The solution was not simply to build a new penitentiary. It was to create an exemplary punishment model, a place where discipline would be so severe, so impersonal, and so absolute that the fear of being sent there would be enough to prevent crime. The location was chosen deliberately, isolated enough to sever ties with the outside world, close enough to constantly remind New York City that punishment was right there, watching. When Sing Sing opened in 1826, it already carried a reputation. Before receiving its first prisoners, the prison itself was built using forced inmate labor, men in chains cutting stone, raising walls, constructing the very cells they might one day occupy themselves. From the beginning, the message was unmistakable. Here, you build your own cage. The silence that was not peace. Unlike other prisons of the time, Sing Sing was not known for noise. There were no constant screams, no frequent riots, at least not at first. There was something worse. Enforced silence. Prisoners were forbidden to speak, forbidden to look at one another, forbidden to express any emotion other than obedience. Any infraction, no matter how small, resulted in severe physical punishment. The system was simple: hard labor during the day, isolation at night, absolute silence at all times. It wasn't just a prison, it was a brutal social experiment, and the guards knew it. Here, you disappear. For many inmates, the most traumatic moment was not entering the cell. It was the final walk through the main corridors. Long, narrow, cold, lit by windows placed too high to see the sky. Veterans said that was the moment identity died. Names were replaced with numbers. Personal histories ceased to matter. Requests for explanation went unanswered. Sing Sing had no interest in who you were, only in how long it would take to break you. Some men resisted, others went insane, and some became something else entirely. Colder, quieter, unrecognizable, fear that traveled beyond the walls. Strangely, Sing Sing inspired more fear outside the prison than inside. Parents used its name to frighten their children. Judges cited it as a moral warning. Newspapers described sentences as though they were permanent exiles. But the public didn't know everything. They didn't know about the hidden punishments. They didn't know about judicial errors. They didn't know how many men entered guilty, and how many did not. And they certainly didn't know that Sing Sing was about to become the epicenter of the most irreversible punishment ever used by the state of New York. A method that was silent, clean in the eyes of the public, and terrifying for those on the other side of the door. Something even darker was coming. For decades, Sing Sing operated as the ultimate symbol of discipline and order. But behind that image, something was being prepared. A new role, a new function, one that would transform the prison into a name whispered even among the most dangerous criminals in the country. Sing Sing would not be just a place to serve time. It would become a place where time ended. And in the next part, you'll discover how Sing Sing became the most feared punishment machine in America, and why so many men never left it alive. By the time Sing Sing was fully operational, the prison was no longer just a symbol. It had become a system. A system designed not to rehabilitate, not to correct, but to condition obedience through fear. What happened inside Sing Sing followed a rigid logic, one that left little room for mercy, error, or individuality. Every hour of the day was planned, every movement was monitored, every deviation was punished. From the outside, officials described it as order. From the inside, inmates knew it as something else entirely. It was mechanical punishment, a prison that ran like a factory. Each morning began the same way. A bell rang before sunrise. Cells opened in sequence. Men stepped out in silence, eyes forward, hands at their sides. There was no conversation, no hesitation, no room for confusion. The prison operated on the belief that routine erased rebellion. If every second of a man's life was controlled, then resistance would eventually disappear. Work assignments were harsh and relentless. Quarry labor, stone cutting, construction, laundry under extreme heat. Manual labor with minimal tools. The work was not meant to teach skills. It was meant to exhaust the body and dull the mind. Supervisors watched closely. A pause that lasted too long. A glance held for a second too many. A posture that suggested defiance. Punishment followed immediately. Discipline without explanation. One of the most disturbing aspects of Sing Sing was that punishment was rarely explained. Men were beaten without being told what rule they had broken. Sent to isolation without knowing for how long. Denied food, denied sleep, denied medical care, with no justification offered. This uncertainty was intentional. When a man does not understand why he is being punished, he begins to believe that punishment is inevitable, regardless of behavior. And inevitability destroys hope. In Sing Sing, hope was considered dangerous. Solitary confinement, the prison inside the prison. Among all forms of punishment, one stood above the rest. Solitary confinement. The cells were small, barely enough room to stand or lie down. Cold in winter, suffocating in summer. Inmates were left alone for days, sometimes weeks, sometimes longer. No light, no sound, no sense of time. Men began talking to themselves, counting cracks in the wall, hallucinating voices that weren't there. Some emerged broken. Some never truly emerged at all. Guards noticed something unsettling. After long periods in isolation, many inmates no longer resisted orders. They complied instantly. They avoided eye contact. They moved as if they were no longer fully present. The system was working. Why Sing Sing terrified even hardened criminals. By the late 19th century, Sing Sing's reputation had spread far beyond New York. Criminals in other states spoke of it with caution. Some begged judges for transfer elsewhere. Others accepted longer sentences, anything to avoid being sent there. Because Sing Sing was not just about time served, it was about what that time did to you. Men left physically alive but psychologically altered. Former inmates described a lingering effect. An inability to sleep without silence, panic when hearing bells or metal doors, difficulty speaking freely, even years later. Sing Sing followed them home. The state's confidence grows. To officials, the prison was a success. Crime statistics appeared stable. Discipline was absolute. Escapes were rare. The public saw Sing Sing as proof that the system worked. And when the state searched for a place to implement an even harsher form of justice, one meant to be final, there was only one logical choice. Sing Sing already had the infrastructure, already had the reputation, already had the fear. It would become more than a prison. It would become an execution site. A new role begins to take shape. At first, executions were handled quietly. Little was said publicly. Records were minimal. But inside the prison, inmates knew. They heard footsteps at night, doors opening when no one returned, whispers passing down cell blocks. A man would be there one day, gone the next. No explanation, No announcement. Just absence. And absence in Sing Sing spoke louder than screams. The line between punishment and death disappears. As the years passed, the distinction between serving time and awaiting death grew thinner. Some men entered Sing Sing knowing they would never leave. Others arrived believing they still had a future, until they learned otherwise. Mistakes happened. Evidence was weak. Confessions were coerced. But once a man entered the system, reversing course was nearly impossible. Because Sing Sing did not pause to reconsider. It moved forward, relentlessly. By the early 20th century, Sing Sing was no longer just feared. It was watched. Newspapers followed its cases closely. Courtrooms across America referenced it constantly. And criminals, famous and unknown alike, understood that being sent there meant entering a system that rarely reversed itself. Sing Sing had become a national stage for punishment. And on that stage, some of the most controversial names in American history would appear. When notoriety offered no protection, one of the great illusions of fame is the belief that visibility offers safety. In Sing Sing, notoriety changed nothing. Murderers who made headlines were treated the same as anonymous men from forgotten towns. Once inside the walls, status disappeared. The prison made no distinction between crimes of passion, organized crime, political scandals, sensational murders. What mattered was not why you were there, but what was scheduled to happen next. And everyone inside knew that some schedules ended abruptly. The chair that changed everything. When the state of New York adopted the electric chair as a method of execution, Sing Sing became its primary site. The decision was framed as progress. Electricity was described as modern, efficient, humane. But for those inside the prison, the reality was far from humane. Executions were carried out at night. The condemned were removed quietly. Guards spoke little. Inmates learned to recognize the signs. Increased security. Unusual silence in the corridors. A tension that felt heavier than usual. Men would lie awake in their cells, counting footsteps, knowing exactly where they were headed. Ruth Snyder, and the shock that reached beyond the walls. In 1928, Sing Sing became the center of national outrage with the execution of Ruth Snyder. Convicted of murdering her husband, Snyder's execution was meant to be routine. Instead, it became infamous. A journalist secretly photographed the moment electricity passed through her body. The image was published the next morning. For the first time, the public saw what Sing Sing truly represented, not as an abstract idea, but as a physical, irreversible act. The photograph shocked the nation. Supporters of capital punishment defended it. Opponents called it barbaric. Inside Sing Sing, the reaction was different. The inmates did not debate morality. They understood the message clearly. This can happen to anyone here. Mistakes that could not be undone. As executions increased, so did doubts. Confessions obtained under pressure. Witnesses who later recanted. Evidence that disappeared or was ignored. But Sing Sing did not stop. Once a man entered death row, the system moved forward with mechanical certainty. Appeals took years. Some never reached the right desk. Others were denied without explanation. The chair did not care, and neither, it seemed, did the institution tasked with operating it. The Rosenbergs and the global spotlight. In 1953, Sing Sing once again became the center of the world's attention, with the execution of Julius Rosenberg and Ethel Rosenberg. Accused of espionage during the Cold War, their trial polarized the nation and the world. Protests erupted internationally. Petitions flooded the White House. Foreign leaders pleaded for clemency. None of it mattered. The executions proceeded as scheduled. Inside Sing Sing, inmates listened as history unfolded a few corridors away. Some believed the Rosenbergs were guilty. Others believed they were not. But everyone understood the deeper truth. Once Sing Sing decided your fate, global pressure meant very little. Fear becomes internalized over time. The presence of death changed inmate behavior. Men stopped talking about the future, stopped making long-term plans, stopped imagining life beyond the walls. Conversations shifted to shorter time frames. Tomorrow, next meal, next inspection. The electric chair had accomplished what silence and isolation alone could not. It made death immediate, even for those not scheduled to face it. The guards were not immune. Contrary to public belief, Sing Sing did not only affect inmates. Guards who worked execution nights often resigned within months. Some refused to speak about what they witnessed. Others drank heavily. A few described recurring dreams, doors that would not open, switches that could not be turned off, faces they could not forget. The prison consumed everyone who participated in its function. A reputation that could not be contained by mid-century. Sing Sing was no longer just feared, it was questioned. Journalists began investigating. Lawyers challenged convictions. The public grew uneasy. The very system designed to showcase order and justice was beginning to reveal its cracks. And as pressure mounted, something inside Sing Sing began to change. Not quietly, not peacefully, but violently. By the time public doubt began to grow, Sing Sing had already crossed a threshold that could not be undone. Executions were no longer rare events, they were routine. And with routine came mistakes. Mistakes that, unlike broken rules or lost paperwork, could never be corrected. When the machine failed, the electric chair had been sold to the public as precise, modern, controlled. But inside Sing Sing, it often proved to be none of those things. Witnesses later described executions that did not end quickly, electric currents that failed to deliver instant death, bodies that convulsed longer than expected. Sometimes the equipment malfunctioned, sometimes human error intervened, sometimes no one could explain what went wrong. What was certain was this: the promise of a swift, humane end was not always kept, and when it wasn't, there was no second chance. Silence is policy. When executions went wrong, officials rarely spoke publicly. Reports were brief, language was sanitized, details were withheld, newspapers were given limited access, witnesses were discouraged from describing what they had seen. The state's position was simple. To acknowledge failure was to invite scrutiny, and scrutiny threatened the very foundation of the system. Inside the prison, however, silence only intensified fear. Inmates knew when something had gone wrong. They could hear it. They could feel it in the air. And they understood something the public did not. If the system could fail at the final moment, it could have failed long before that. Men who should not have been there. As decades passed, cases began to surface that raised uncomfortable questions. Confessions obtained after hours of interrogation. Witnesses who later admitted to lying. Evidence discovered too late. Some inmates were exonerated, but only after spending years inside Sing Sing. Others were not so fortunate. They died with appeals still pending, with doubts unresolved, with families still insisting on their innocence. The prison kept moving forward. The chair kept operating, and the margin for error remained terrifyingly small. The psychological toll reaches a breaking point. By the mid-20th century, Sing Sing was no longer merely enforcing punishment. It was producing trauma. Inmates awaiting execution often deteriorated rapidly. Insomnia, hallucinations, severe anxiety, complete emotional withdrawal. Some begged for their sentence to be carried out sooner, not because they wanted to die, but because the waiting was unbearable. Others lost all sense of time. Guards reported men who stopped responding entirely, who stared at walls for hours, who did not react when their names were called. This was not discipline. It was psychological collapse. Dissent begins to leak out. Despite official silence, stories escaped. Former guards spoke anonymously. Journalists uncovered inconsistencies. Lawyers challenged procedures. Public opinion began to shift. What was once seen as strength now looked like rigidity. What was once seen as order now looked like cruelty. Sing Sing had been built to intimidate criminals, but now it was unsettling the nation itself, a system trapped by its own logic. The greatest problem facing Sing Sing was not just moral, it was structural. The prison had been designed to function without hesitation, without pause, without reconsideration. To admit error was to admit that the system itself was flawed, and a system built on fear cannot easily accept doubt. So officials doubled down. Executions continued. Silence remained the default response. But pressure was building, not just from the public, from within the prison. Something was about to give. The environment inside Sing Sing grew volatile. Tensions rose between inmates and guards. Small conflicts escalated faster than before. Authority was obeyed, but no longer respected. The old formula, silence, fear, routine, was losing its power. And when fear stops working, what remains is chaos. By the time the pressure reached its peak, Sing Sing was no longer held together by fear alone. For more than a century, the prison had relied on a simple equation: control the body, silence the mind, and obedience would follow. But that equation was beginning to fail. And when a system built on absolute control starts to crack, the collapse is never quiet. When fear stops working inside Sing Sing, inmates had learned the rules perfectly. They knew when to stand, when to move, when to lower their eyes. But something had changed. Fear no longer produced compliance. It produced resentment. Men who believed they had nothing left to lose stopped reacting the way the system expected. Punishments no longer shocked them. Isolation no longer corrected them. The threat of death, once paralyzing, became abstract. And abstraction is dangerous for a system that depends on terror, small acts of defiance. The breakdown did not begin with riots. It began with subtle resistance, delayed compliance, silent refusal to cooperate, work slowdowns, glances held too long. These were not dramatic acts, but they were intentional, and guards noticed. Discipline tightened, punishments became harsher, rules were enforced more aggressively. Instead of restoring order, this escalation only deepened the divide. Sing Sing was no longer a place of silent obedience. It was a place of contained tension. The outside world pushes back. At the same time, pressure from outside the walls intensified. Civil rights groups questioned execution practices. Psychologists criticized prolonged solitary confinement. Lawyers demanded transparency. Journalists began reframing Sing Sing not as a symbol of justice but as a warning. The narrative was shifting. What had once represented strength now looked outdated. What had once been admired now looked cruel, and the state could feel it. The slow arrival of reform change did not come suddenly. It arrived reluctantly. Policies were adjusted quietly. Some disciplinary practices were softened. Psychological evaluations became more common. Officials spoke of modernization, of progress, of learning from the past. But inside Sing Sing, skepticism ran deep. Men who had endured decades of silence and fear did not trust reforms that arrived without acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The damage had already been done. The electric chair fades. One of the most significant changes came with the decline of executions. Legal challenges multiplied. Public opposition grew. The moral certainty that once justified capital punishment began to erode. Executions slowed, then stopped. The electric chair, once the prison's defining symbol, became dormant. It still existed. It still occupied space. But its presence no longer commanded the same power. Sing Sing had lost the element that once made it uniquely terrifying. And without it, the prison's identity fractured. A prison without a clear purpose. Sing Sing now faced a problem it had never been designed to solve. What happens when a prison built entirely around fear must suddenly operate under scrutiny? The old methods were discredited. The new ones were incomplete. Guards trained under the old system struggled to adapt. Inmates tested boundaries. Authority became inconsistent. The prison no longer knew what it was supposed to be. The human cost becomes undeniable. As records were reviewed and cases re-examined, the scale of damage became clearer. Years lost. Lives altered permanently, families destroyed by decisions that could not be reversed. Sing Sing had not just punished criminals. It had reshaped generations. And no reform could undo that. An institution forced to look at itself. For the first time in its history, Sing Sing was no longer looking outward, projecting fear. It was looking inward, questioning its purpose, reevaluating its methods, confronting a legacy it could not erase. The prison still stood. The walls were still there. But the certainty that once defined it was gone. Sing Sing did not disappear. It was not erased. It did not collapse into history the way many expected. Instead, it remained. A structure of stone and steel standing quietly along the Hudson River, its presence no longer dominating headlines, yet never fully fading from the American consciousness. Because Sing Sing's true legacy was never just physical, it was psychological. A prison that became a symbol over time, Sing Sing stopped being discussed only as a place. It became an idea, a reference point in debates about justice, a cautionary example in discussions about punishment, a reminder of what happens when fear replaces reflection. Its name still carries weight. To say Sing Sing is to invoke absolute authority, irreversible consequences, a system that once believed it could not be wrong. Few institutions in American history have carried that kind of symbolic power. The men who left, and the ones who didn't. Some inmates eventually walked out of Sing Sing. They were older, quieter, marked by years of enforced silence. Many struggled to adapt to life outside. Ordinary sounds felt overwhelming. Simple choices caused anxiety. They had learned to survive in a system where thinking independently was dangerous. Freedom did not come easily. Others never left at all. Their names remained in court transcripts, in faded prison records, in family memories. They became part of a history that could no longer be corrected. Lessons that arrived too late. In hindsight, Sing Sing revealed something deeply uncomfortable. A system built entirely on fear can function efficiently, but efficiency is not the same as justice. The prison succeeded in controlling behavior. It failed in understanding humanity. Silence created order. It also erased accountability. Routine reduced chaos. It also normalized cruelty. By the time reforms arrived, the damage was already embedded in the institution's DNA. Why Sing Sing still matters today? Sing Sing operates under a very different framework. Psychological services exist. Oversight is stronger. Transparency is expected. But the past has not been erased. Modern debates about solitary confinement, capital punishment, and mass incarceration often return to Sing Sing, not because it was unique, but because it was honest in its brutality. It showed where unchecked authority leads. A warning written in stone. The walls of Sing Sing were built to last, and in a way so was its lesson, that punishment without reflection becomes excess. That systems without humility create irreversible harm. That fear may control behavior, but it cannot create justice. Sing Sing was meant to be the end of crime. Instead, it became evidence of something else entirely. The final truth. Sing Sing was never just a prison for criminals. It was a mirror, reflecting what a society is willing to do when it believes control matters more than conscience. And once that line is crossed, the consequences do not stay behind the walls. They follow us forward.